Okay, today I am going to be making our annual pineapple braid and cinnamon rolls that we have for breakfast for Christmas morning. This is Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas, everyone. The dough is basically the same dough that I made for Thanksgiving, my mom's yeast roll recipe. I will put a card up in the corner and you can click on that to check out that recipe. The only difference is instead of a half a cup of honey, I added a cup of honey because you want the dough to be a little bit sweeter. So now the dough is on its second rise. It's in a warm place rising, and I have to make the filling because the filling has to cool down a little bit before you put it on the dough to bake it. So I'm making the filling now. We make a pineapple filling, and you can make it just about any flavor you want, I suppose, but it's always been a traditional thing for us to do pineapple. Now I'm making 3 of these braids, one for my brother whose birthday is on Christmas Day. He was born on Christmas Day, so it was always been a tradition for him to have these pineapple braids. My mom always made one for him, so I'm taking up that tradition. So I'm making one for my brother, one for my dad, because so he can have it for breakfast tomorrow, and then one for our family. So because of that, I'm doubling the recipe for the pineapple filling. I'm going to go ahead and give you the measurements for a single batch, but just know that I am doubling it. So in this pan, you want a heavy bottom saucepan. You need to put in half a cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of cornstarch, and half a teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. There's the sugar, cornstarch, I think this bowl might have been a little bit damp. Cornstarch stuck to it. And sorry if I'm sniffing. My allergies are driving me crazy today. And then salt. My kitchen is an absolute disaster because I've been doing so much cooking for the last few days. Trying to keep up with the dishes and all that is a challenge. Okay, so you just blend those 3 ingredients into the saucepan. And into this, you gradually pour in 3/4 of a cup of pineapple juice. Now what you do is you take a can of crushed pineapple and you drain it thoroughly, and then you use the juice for the sauce. So you put your heat on medium-high and you gradually stir in the pineapple juice. And then you're going to want to cook this. You want to bring it to a boil, stirring constantly. And then once it comes to a boil, then you boil it for 1 minute. So I'm going to go ahead and shut you off, and when this comes to a boil, I'll bring you back. Boiling like crazy, and it's thickened up a lot. So you need to boil it for a minute, and that's basically to cook the cornstarchy flavor out of it. So I've got my timer going, and you don't want to stop stirring this because you don't want it to burn. That would not be good. Now, don't worry, once you add the pineapple to this, and you also add some butter, then it will loosen up a bit. It won't be quite so thick. Okay, so there's my timer. I'm going to take it off the heat. Since I have a gas stove, I just have to turn the heat off. I don't have to move it off the burner. And you add 1 tablespoon of butter. Mix that in. And then the contents of a 120-ounce can of crushed pineapple. Now remember, I'm doubling this recipe, so what I'm adding is actually 2 cans of crushed pineapple, and I think I'm going to not use the whisk anymore. I'm going to use my spatula here. And just stir this in thoroughly. So see how that is loosened up a lot, and it's become a beautiful, spreadable consistency. But this is way too hot to put on the dough yet, and the dough still has to rise one more time before I shape it. So while the dough is rising, I'm going to let this cool, and I'll let it sit on here in the pan on the stove and cool. So when it's time to come back and shape the dough, we will be back. Okay, so the dough has risen twice, and now it's time to shape it. And this batch of dough, half of it's going to go to the pineapple braid, and the other half is going to go for cinnamon rolls. And I have a piece of parchment paper here on the counter. It's just easier to form the braid on here and then lift it onto the baking sheet. So I'm just going to dump out this dough right onto the parchment paper. I'm going to punch it down a little bit, get some of the air out of it. Quite a bit of air in it, actually. And then I'm going to roughly cut it in half. We do cinnamon rolls and the pumpkin braid. I always call it pumpkin braid, pineapple braid, both, because in my younger years of married life, I didn't do the pumpkin. There I go again. Pineapple. Anytime you hear me say pumpkin in this video, translate it as pineapple. Anyway, I didn't do the pineapple braid because I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a different tradition. So I did cinnamon rolls instead. Well, then last year, because my mom was sick, I did the pineapple roll for my brother and for my family next door. And so I decided to just go ahead and make one for us too, because it had been a long time since I'd had it, and I like it actually even better than my cinnamon rolls. And so I just decided that from now on, and then I was going to just, not make the cinnamon rolls, but my kids who have grown up with the cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning were disappointed if I didn't. So I just decided to make both. This batch of dough is enough to make a ton of cinnamon rolls, or a good batch of cinnamon rolls and a pineapple braid. So anyway, as you can see, what I'm doing is flattening this dough out into a rectangle. And you want it to be a pretty good size rectangle. Oh, those dogs. I don't know why they've been doing that all day. Anytime anybody walks around, they act like somebody's here or something. But anyway, you want to flatten this dough out. I don't know, 10 by 15 maybe. Maybe not that. I'm not good at deciphering measurements, but you just kind of really have to work with it a bit, because it has a lot of elasticity to it, and it kind of wants to bounce back in. It doesn't want to keep its shape until you work with it a bit. Okay, so that looks about right, about the right size. And I've already formed the other two pineapple rolls. So I've got the rest of the filling here. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the middle. And then you spread it out, and you don't want to get it all the way to the edges. You want to leave an inch or two around the edges. I'm still sniffing. I don't know, I've been sniffing and sneezing. My nose has been itching all day. It's driving me crazy. Okay, so we've got the filling on. Now, how you create the braid is I use a pizza cutter, and you just start making little slits, couple of inches long on both sides of the braid. And then you just literally braid the dough. You take the end piece and you pull it forward, and then you just crisscross. And yeah, some of the filling is going to squish out the top, but that's okay. That just makes it even that much tastier. You just crisscross them all the way down. And then you do the same on this end. You pull that end up, tuck it in, and then these last two, I just kind of pinch them. So this is where the parchment paper comes in really handy. You just take a cookie sheet, and then you pick up the parchment paper and you kind of scoot the tray underneath, and voila, it's on there. Now I go ahead and take my kitchen shears and trim off the excess parchment paper because it tends to get really brown in the oven. But I do leave enough of a space so that when it comes time to take this off of the cookie sheet to cool on the cooling rack, I have a little bit of a handle that I can pick up on either side. So now this needs to rise one more time before you bake it. So I'm going to go ahead and just put my dampened towel back over it and then put it over by the stove where it's warmer so that it will rise. And then I'm going to go ahead and work on my cinnamon rolls next. So I'll be right back. Okay, so now it's time to form the cinnamon rolls. And I'm not going to put the dough on parchment for the cinnamon rolls, and you'll see why in a minute. So I'm just going to dump this dough out, and you do the same thing. You form it into a rectangle, and it takes a little bit of finessing to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and finish shaping this, and when I have the dough to the right size, I'll be back. Okay, so now I have the dough rolled out to the size I want, and the next thing I'm going to use is, you can use butter, which actually is tastier, but since I have a dairy allergy, I have to use non-dairy stuff. So I'm going to be using this Bluebonnet Light as the butter, and you just want to, I'm just going to use my hands because there's no point in dirtying up a utensil for this. So you just spread butter, kind of warm it in your fingers, and spread it all over. And you know what? This is a treat. This is something special we get once a year. So don't even worry about the calories. Just spread butter pretty liberally all over the dough. Okay. That looks pretty good. I've got this towel here. I'm going to wipe my hands off. Then the next thing you're going to want to do is put a cinnamon sugar mixture on here. Now, in the past, I've just mixed white sugar and cinnamon together and sprinkled it on there. Well, I was watching Heather from the Needy Homesteader make cinnamon rolls a while ago, and she used brown sugar, and cinnamon instead of white sugar. And what she did is she just spread brown sugar liberally on the dough and then sprinkled cinnamon on top. So I'm going to try it that way this year and see if we like it better. I know the brown sugar will make them more like a caramel cinnamon roll. And I don't measure anything when you're doing this. It's all a matter of preference. And I know it's going to look like a lot of sugar, but like I said, these are a special treat we get once a year. So I don't know how much sugar I used. 3/4 of a cup maybe. I don't know. But you just want to, and then you want to kind of pat it down. That looks pretty good. Now I like my cinnamon rolls very cinnamony. So, got this cinnamon that we got at Costco. And I'm just going to start sprinkling it. And really on camera especially, you're not going to be able to see it. But I think probably total would be like 2 teaspoons maybe of cinnamon. So that looks pretty good. So then what you need to do is you start on this long edge and you start rolling it very tightly all the way till the other end. You just keep rolling it. So then I've got a pan here. It's like a casserole dish. It's not really, it's a little bit smaller than a 9x13. And what you want to do then is a handy dandy pizza cutter again. You cut these into cinnamon roll sizes. So when I get these all cut, I'll be back. So there we have it. We have a pan of the cinnamon rolls. Now I had to switch it to a bigger pan because that one I originally had was not quite big enough. So you just want to cover this with a damp towel and let it rise till double and then bake them. And you bake them at 400 degrees for 12 to 15 minutes or until golden brown. When the pineapple rolls and the cinnamon rolls have come out of the oven, we'll be back and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so here are the finished pineapple rolls. Those two are going to go over to my dad and he can decide which one goes to my brother. I'm thinking the bigger one will probably go to my brother because he has 4 kids, and then my dad will keep the smaller one. I don't know how they came out to be so different in size. I thought I divided the dough evenly, but you just never know unless you weigh the dough, which I didn't. And then these are our cinnamon rolls, and this is the braid that we are going to be keeping. Now the final touch on these is a glaze. Olivia is making the powdered sugar glaze, and it's basically powdered sugar and pineapple juice, and I'll just pour in like just a couple of tablespoons at a time and then mix it up. And we're going to need a lot because we have 3 braids and the cinnamon rolls to glaze. So once she gets that all whipped up, we'll glaze these. Now these two are still too warm, this one and this one, to glaze, but I want to get those glazed. So anyway, we're going to glaze these two now because I want to get those over to my dad, and they're cooler. They're still a little tiny bit warm, but it'll be okay. But these are still too hot, so we'll glaze these later. Oh, and these dogs are driving me insane today. They're so barky today. Stop it. What are you barking about? Yeah. I hear ya. So here we are. There's the finished product there. And I'm going to glaze this one. And like I said, the cinnamon rolls and the other pumpkin, there I go again, pumpkin, pineapple braid, I will glaze in a little while when they've had a chance to cool off a little bit. more. Okay, there they are, our annual pineapple braid and cinnamon rolls.